All right.
Great, thank you. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Lori Osborne, and I am the director here at the Frances Willard House Museum. And I'm gonna just start off with a little bit of introductions, a little about us, and then Fiona, my colleague here, will take over and give us the program today. So in case you are unaware, which I happen to think most of you are not, the Frances Willard House Museum was the home of Frances Willard, who was 19th century suffragist and social reformer. Willard was the longtime president of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which was the largest organization of women in the world by 1895. You can find out more about her home, about her life, and the WCTU on our website, franceswillardhouse.org. Though we were closed in the museum since the beginning of the pandemic in March of 2020, we reopened this past July for tours, and we would love to see you on a tour. We're accepting reservations on our website. The groups are small. We're masked, keeping everything pretty safe as much as we can while we're still in this pandemic. So please go to the website and explore more about that. If you don't already get our email newsletter, that's also available. Sign up on our website. You can find us on social media. You can make a donation for this program, which is free today. And all of our programs this year are going to continue to be free if you'd like to. And I'll post a link in a little while in chat. For this year, we know that many people do not live nearby, and some of them are on this program right now, or feel comfortable gathering. So we're going to be keeping our programs online for a little while longer. It provides us new audiences and wider reach. So we'll adjust as needed in the future, but for right now, we're going to keep to online. And Fiona will finish up with a little bit more about programs that are coming up this fall. I already mentioned some housekeeping things. We want you to use chat right now for any questions, and please do interrupt us with questions as they come to your mind, because sometimes you won't remember it when you're thinking about it later. So just throw it in chat. We may not take it right away, but it'll sit there and wait for us when we're ready. And like I said, we are recording and we'll share this on YouTube. So without further ado, let's get started with our program today. So this year, every year we do something at the end of September for Willard's birthday, which is September 28th, this coming Tuesday. Normally this would be an open house or something where we have a community gathering, but we can't do that this year, and we weren't able to do it last year either. So we've come up with different ways of sort of honoring this day or talking about her in a different way, a new way at this moment. And this year we decided to take this little quote and use it as our theme and our jumping off point for our discussion. So our Do Everything 21 theme is from this quote: "Alone we can do little. Separated, we are the units of weakness, but aggregated, we become batteries of power. Agitate, educate, organize. These are the deathless watchwords of success." And this was especially true for women. And Willard knew that when she said these words. So we've gathered here today to talk a little bit about Willard's Do Everything approach to leadership. Her life illustrated this, and she promoted it for other women throughout her life and her work. And this year, we've decided to do this not only by exploring this Do Everything leadership, but by presenting the house to you online and using it as a jumping off point for one of the many stories that the house tells. So what do we mean when we say do everything? It's a big word. It's sometimes a daunting thing to think about, but we've given it a lot of thought in the past few years, and we've done some research, and we've kind of explored the idea in our staff and in other ways. And what we've kind of discovered in this exploration is that Willard had an interesting approach to women's leadership. She was looking at the women from her time, and she was thinking about where they are and how to get them to take on leadership, even in very small ways. So the model of leadership she promoted encouraged women to act from wherever they were, from right where they were, and on whatever was of concern to them and in their communities, large or small. They didn't need to wait for permission to do something. They should do everything. They should start with something of personal concern to them and look beyond themselves to make change in the world around them. So this idea of leadership is a little bit different. It's starting small, starting right where you are. And I think Willard understood her time and the women of her time really well. And this model really worked, and it really appealed to the women of her time. So her idea of leadership development was to go from yourself to the world, and it provided a strong foundation of personal experience for women's activism and ensured that the change they sought was not too far out of reach. Willard believed that starting small and close to home with incremental, even baby steps toward change could lead to much bigger and farther impact in the future and be more successful in the long run. It would give women encouragement. They would see the success immediately, or, maybe not immediately, but within their own sphere, within something they could witness, and it would make them feel confident to take on the next challenge. So Willard's own life and work really illustrates this model of activism and leadership. So although the museum is primarily thought of as Willard's private home, and it looks like a sweet little Victorian cottage from the outside, the house was also a unique site of many women's public-facing work. So it really is an appropriate place for us to start on this exploration of do everything leadership. Fiona Maxwell, our museum operations manager, is now going to lead us on a tour, a virtual exploration of the Willard House's office spaces, of which there are many. In fact, almost every room of the house has a little bit of work going on in it. And we'll discuss what it means to interpret and currently work in. I'm sitting in my office in this house, a historic women's workplace, as well as how Willard's do everything approach can be applied today. I should say Fiona has been with us for a while at the Willard House. She started as a tour guide. She's been an intern. She was our museum fellow, and she's now on our staff. She is currently a PhD student in the history department at the University of Chicago, and we're really glad for Fiona's contribution today. So take it away, Fiona.
Thanks, Lori. All right, so let's start with the outside of Rest Cottage. So before the Frances Willard House Museum was the Frances Willard House Museum, it was called Rest Cottage because at the height of Willard's career, when she was traveling all over the world, she would return home for a spot of rest. But Rest Cottage never really was a place of rest for Willard or for any of the many other women who lived and worked there. So to tell the story of Rest Cottage from the point of view of women's work and women's public-facing community engagement and social change, I've included this old picture from the 19-teens, which was after Willard was passed away many years before, but the house was currently the national headquarters of the WCTU, and you see a group of young women who are all working on standing on one of the porches. But one of the important things to realize about Rest Cottage is it's actually two houses. So if you split it right down the middle, if you can see where my cursor is, the left, meaning this part, was built in 1865 by Frances Willard's father, and it was built as the family's home. And then the other side was built in 1881, and that had always primarily functioned as a workplace. So we're going to kind of dive into the two different halves of the house and trace how Willard's leadership evolved over time, as well as the other women who eventually came to join her at quote unquote Rest Cottage. So I want to begin in Frances Willard's own bedroom. So this is in the older part of the house, the part that was built in 1865. And I've called it the Dean of Women's Home Office because before Frances Willard became the internationally renowned suffragist and temperance leader, she primarily operated in the field of women's education. Upon graduation from Northwestern Female College in the 1850s in Evanston, Willard became a school teacher for several years, and by the early 1870s, she assumed the presidency of the Evanston College for Ladies, which then in 1871 merged with Northwestern University, and Willard became the first Dean of Women at Northwestern. And so her workplace for that job actually still exists. It's on Clark Street in Evanston, and it was called the Women's College, but more recently it was known as the Music Administration Building at Northwestern. So you can look that up and see a picture of that building. But she did a lot of her work as a teacher and as a university administrator in her bedroom at her desk. And so if you can see, we have a historic photo of the bedroom, but the restored desk here, you can see a giant book on it. And that was her dictionary, which she specifically used in this time period when she was Dean of Women. As well as a little slate that we put on the desk because as the story goes, apparently she would get really great ideas in the middle of the night and then she would wake up and, she doesn't have her phone to type them in or a pen and paper without getting ink all over herself. So she would write it in chalk on a slate and copy it out into her notebooks later. But so what kind of leadership went on in this tiny little home office when she is the Dean of Women? Well, she would plan her lessons. She was a professor and she gave a lot of lectures to students as well as orations about social and political topics. She would also be grading women's work and papers and essays potentially in this office space. And one story I want to briefly tell in this room is that it was really in this period in the early 1870s when she's at Northwestern and then right after she resigns that she really develops her voice as a public speaker. And she learns, she teaches herself to speak without memorized notes. So one thing that she did at this desk is she wrote the manuscripts for her speeches, and then she would practice them and memorize them so she wouldn't have what she called the outline crutch or the manuscript crutch, and she could really address her audience, which was extremely revolutionary for a woman to be doing that at that time. To move to our next office space, when she leaves Northwestern, and that's a story I could talk about in the Q&A if we wanted to talk about why she left Northwestern. But in 1874, she resigned as Dean of Women, and she got involved in the new temperance movement in the WCTU. That's the year that it was formed, and temperance was just the biggest issue of the day. I think it's really important to just remember that temperance was the longest and the largest 19th century social movement. People tend to forget that. And it really had a resurgence in the early 1870s. So as Willard is looking for a career change and as she's looking for a way to assume kind of a public-facing leadership role, the temperance movement offers a perfect opportunity for that, especially because in this 1870s, resurgence of the movement, it's primarily led by women, which is a new development. So Willard joins the WCTU and her office space, this is down the hall from her bedroom, initially is this tiny little cramped space that you see on the far left, where you can see she has tons of pictures and papers absolutely everywhere, but it's very cramped. And so ultimately, once she is the president of the National WCTU, As a birthday present, sometime in the 1890s, they actually expand the office space into the more roomy space that it is today that you can see in the color photo. But as you see in the middle photo, she still had a very messy working style with papers and photographs everywhere. It really seems to be how she liked to do her work. So what type of do everything leadership and work was going on in this office? Well, this is really the time when Willard coined the term do everything, because when she came to the WCTU, they were kind of a single issue movement, really focused on temperance. And they had grown out of this movement called the Women's Temperance Crusades, where women would gather at saloons and pray and sing hymns and try to effect what was called moral suasion, of convincing individual people to stop drinking or convincing saloon keepers to shut down. Willard increasingly felt that the temperance movement needed to broaden and to encompass a wide range of social and political issues, and that the only way for these groups of women to actually make change in the issues and the problems that concern them was to embrace things like women's suffrage, so that they can vote for the politicians and laws and run for office themselves to actually support the issues that they care about. Embracing other issues that were kind of related to the underlying causes of alcoholism that had to do with economic injustice, as well as helping women and children in any way they can, including by founding kindergartens and things like that. So in expanding the WCTU to kind of embrace every single possible new idea and sort of the progressive reform movement, Willard was encouraging women to not just try to convince their husbands or their fathers, but she was encouraging them to, as the shirt says, to publish, lobby, petition, preach, organize, educate. There's all these different verbs that she decides that is totally within women's sphere. And so in this room, she is writing letters to women all over the world. She is writing speeches that she's going to give fully memorized all over the world. And she's writing articles. She really also was a prolific best-selling author of books and articles, pamphlets. So this room really, it became kind of the signature room of the Willard House in its early days as a museum in the early 1900s. Pictures of this room were published in newspapers, and it really was like the quintessential Willard space. So I just am going to highlight a few key objects that help tell the do everything story in this room. First is this is a close-up of what's on her desk. And I want to highlight the "this is my busy day" sign. This was sort of a do not disturb sign where she could put it on her door, and then people knew not to interrupt her because some really important work was going on. Here we have on the fireplace, there's a quote from a James Whitcomb Riley poem that says, "Let something good be said." And that was Willard's model for how women should pursue do everything leadership together, because her leadership model was very collaborative. And so her idea was that there was enough threatening to tear women down from the outside. Women should always have something good to say about each other and the work that they were doing together. And then two more objects really quick. The top here is Willard's carrying case, which she took on the road with her in trains and boats. She called it Old Faithful. She used it as a pillow, as a carrying case, as a footrest. And as you can see, it's pretty beat up because of all of that use. But that Old Faithful certainly helped her bring do everything around the world. And then finally, a cool piece of 19th century technology. This is one of the many dictaphones that we have in the house where if you've ever been to the archives, you will notice that Frances Willard had very tiny, messy handwriting. And so sometimes she liked to actually dictate her correspondence onto a wax cylinder that then she could send downstairs to the secretaries and the other women who worked in the other side of the house, which we will get to presently. So before we go to the other side of the house, the next office space, if you come downstairs in the old half of the house, is Anna Gordon's office. So Anna Gordon was sort of the Frances Willard's first partner in do everything. She accumulated a lot of allies and housemates over the years who helped her realize this leadership model, and Anna was the first. And so Anna became her personal secretary, and as well as lifelong friend and traveling companion. And so this room in the very front of the house, the window looks out into the front lawn, was where Anna Gordon did her work. And it's really has this very striking desk that has all sorts of little cubby holes. And the desk was initially a gift to Frances Willard, But as you saw on Willard's desk, Willard likes to just explode papers all over the place. So she could never deal with all these little persnickety cupboards. So she gave this amazing desk to Anna Gordon, who has a very neat filing system. So Anna Gordon's work, in addition to being Willard's, manager and helping to arrange all of her appearances and everything like that, and helping her answer correspondence, she had a lot of her own projects and work that she did as part of her do everything model. And her specialty was working with children. So she was really crucial to founding the Loyal Temperance Legion, which was a children's youth group, as well as the Young Women's Christian Temperance Union for kind of teenage young women. But she really worked with a lot of the youngest kids. There's one object that unfortunately is not in the picture. She has a little parlor organ in her office that she would bring to meetings to entertain children while the mothers were all discussing how they were going to change the world. And so there's a lot of kind of child-centric memorabilia in her office that reflects that work. And one more thing about Anna Gordon, who you can see here in this photo, which I don't have a date on this photo, but given that there's this big photo of Willard in the corner, it could potentially even be from after Willard passed away. Anna Gordon outlived Willard by several decades, and she ended up serving as the president of the WCTU during the era of women's suffrage and also the passage of the Prohibition Amendment during the 19-teens. And it was also Anna Gordon who really took charge of turning the house into an actual museum, making it one of the earliest house museums dedicated to a woman in the world. So Anna Gordon is really crucial to do everything and to the house's history as a workplace. All right, so now we are going in through the other porch, the northern side of the house. And so this side of the house was built, as I said, in 1881, and it was initially built to house Willard's sister-in-law, Mary Bannister Willard, and Mary's children, because Willard's brother ended up dying fairly young. Mary Bannister had been one of her closest friends ever since childhood. But Mary Bannister Willard and her children ended up moving to Germany, and this house, this side of the house, ended up becoming a huge workplace for the WCTU. And eventually, after Willard's death, it became actually the national headquarters. So if you entered in through the door and you are going to take a tour, you would end up in the Annex Parlor, which you can see both an old picture and then the new one is kind of more focused in the further back area in the library. But so this parlor was, although it was a parlor, which was a place for social interaction and creativity, it was also a place of politics where the WCTU would hold meetings. They'd get out tables and have all sorts of discussions and get their business done here, as well as playing the piano and having sing-alongs and all sorts of stuff like that. And as you can see in the library portion with the close-up in the color, there's a little picture on the very top right-hand corner of Willard's statue in Statuary Hall of her giving a memorized oration at the podium. So Willard's legacy lived on even after she was gone in the house itself. So if you go through the parlor, you end up in one of the most exciting office spaces in the whole house, which is the Annex Office. And there's really a lot of tiny offices in this one room. There's about 4 or 5 different desks in this room. There's dictaphones, typewriters, all sorts of technology from the 19-teens. And if you see in the color photograph, that map with the colored in states, that was a suffrage map. So this is right when they're really working on trying to pass women's suffrage, and they're tracking which states have suffrage fully granted to women, which states have state level or federal level or local level suffrage. And so items like that give you a sense of some of the many issues that they're discussing. And so on a tour, we often use this room to talk about all the different tactics that these women workers used. And as you can see from the pictures, these are not just Willard and Anna Gordon. There were dozens of women who are in and out either. There are many rooms that are not interpreted in the house that were also kind of boarding house rooms for women workers. There were also women who didn't live there who came in during the day. But as you can see, they were writing all sorts of things. They were preparing to give lectures. They were calling people on the phone by the 19 teens. And so all that do everything work that Willard innovated up in her upstairs office now was also connected down in this downstairs office that was then going to radiate throughout the entire world. And one way that it radiated through the entire world was through publishing. So if you just go behind that office space, you will find what was a kitchen space. Here on the left, you can see the kitchen space of the annex. They turned that into the first publishing house for the WCTU, where they would publish their journal called the Union Signal, which not only dealt with WCTU and temperance matters, but really covered all sorts of social reform issues of the late 19th century. They also published a children's journal called The Young Crusader that had all sorts of stories in it, as well as like dialogues and reciters to help train young people to speak. And this publishing quickly grew out of that tiny little kitchen space. If you come in person, it's a really tiny room. And they ended up constructing a whole brick building in the back of the house, which we now call the administration building. It used to be called the literature building. And so this picture on the right here is of women at work in the literature building, in the printing the Union Signal and all other sorts of pamphlets and literature that they were working on. So through the printed word, that was one way that the WCTU really brought Do Everything to the wider world. So as you can see, we've gone from Willard's tiny little office in her bedroom to literature going out to the whole world. And so just to end, we want to end just by with this picture, which is from a Do Everything event from several years ago when we were all gathered on the front porch of the house. And hopefully maybe by next year even we can be back there. But we want to end just by posing the question of what Do Everything leadership might mean today. We are certainly thinking about that when we craft programming or undertake research projects. And just to give a few ideas of what it means for us today, earlier this summer, we were gathered on the porch for a porch performance that I was involved with. And that was one way in using the arts to kind of build this community and think about how Do Everything encompass even things like arts and performance. Willard certainly did that with oratory. And so Lori and I might speak a little bit now about some of our programs that we've been working on and that are coming up, that you can look forward to see how we are putting Do Everything leadership into practice now. So
yeah, Fiona, do we want to let everyone come on screen and you can either speak or share questions if you have any follow-up. If you notice, one of the narratives that we like to tell in the house is really this idea that people really do, it's really starting small. And Willard did the same thing, though she became this very famous person. She starts working in a one-room log school in a little town not far from Evanston. That's really her first job. So her teaching career even is a very much starts small, and then she grows to being the first dean of women at Northwestern University. And then she starts small again with the WCTU when the WCTU is first formed. She's the corresponding secretary, which means she has the role of communicating with everyone, writing dozens and dozens of letters, but she sort of transforms that role. And not too long after that, she's the second president of the WCTU. She's elected. Her first work for women's suffrage is very small too. She thinks to herself, well, certainly I should probably be thinking about the woman question, as she calls it. And eventually she persuades this women's organization, the WCTU, to take on suffrage, and it becomes really the largest suffrage organization in the 19th century. So it's all, we see it all the time here in this house. That little office becomes this busy beehive of people working throughout the house. It's a little quiet house now, but it certainly wasn't then. And if you notice, maybe Fiona, you could just share quickly, I don't know if it's really easy, the picture of Willard in the den. Because
Yeah.
I want to point out the office building in the image behind her.
Yeah, we have a question about some of the images on the walls, Lori. So if you know any.
Yeah, I also saw that too. So in this image of Willard,
Here we go.
yeah, you can see the building that's right directly next to her head. So talk about thinking big and starting small and going, that actually is an image of the building that was called the Woman's Temple. It was the WCTU headquarters in downtown Chicago. They built this office building for themselves. They rented out much of the building, but they had substantial space that they set aside for their own work. And in this time period, Willard's raising money for that office building. It was constructed at Monroe and LaSalle. Daniel Burnham designed it for them. No longer stands. It was torn down. The WCTU left this building and moved to the house after Willard died. So she not only is she creating this home-based workplace, but she decides to establish women's work in the middle of the city of Chicago on a very prominent corridor as well. So, all right, let's see if we've got some questions. We're going to be posting this video, but you can email if you'd like a copy of the presentation. I'm sure Fiona can share a PDF or some version of it. Sure.
I'll put my email in the chat if people want to contact.
Let's go back. I'll look at the top of the questions. You can see something about all the images around her. They're actually more that we don't even have up on the walls. It was quite a profusion of things all over, some of them very fragile pieces of paper. So we're not going to be hanging them up. We've only given a taste of it in the house today because of that. But the artists are not, there was never a lot of money in this house. So it was a lot of reproductions of things, prints, photographs of people that she was working with, photographs of family members, of colleagues, of friends, and a lot of I would say the primary theme of the images is a lot of sort of Christian imagery, but a lot of women in that imagery too. Yeah, it's really interesting to go around the house and look at what's on the walls and then compare it. We've tried our best to recreate the spaces with what we have from the photographs. Yes, the women's suffrage map is really cool. That's actually a reproduction of a map that we knew they worked from. They also had maps like that for Prohibition, to see who was supporting Prohibition in that time period. So a biography for Frances Willard for 4th grade students. Oh, what a great question. There's a little book actually that's designed really for 4th grade students. It's fiction, but it's called Bicycle Madness. And it was written several years ago now, but you may be able to get a copy of it. We have copies here at the house too. It's fictional, but it's about a little girl who lives next door. She's about a 4th grade girl, I would think, lives next door to Frances Willard. And Frances is learning how to ride a bicycle. And the little girl is being challenged by doing a spelling bee. And the two of them face challenges together as neighbors. And support each other in their challenges. Fun little book. I'll have to think about if there's any 4th grade. There's some old ones. I mean, there's several biographies of Willard that are now would be considered vintage in sort of Famous Women of America series, but nothing recently written.
We have one that's from, I believe, maybe the 60s, that's up in our exhibit room because it has a great cover of her as sort of a frontier girl Like, and it has to do with her story where she convinces her father to let her ride the horse for the first time. So it's fun. I'm not sure how relevant to current
Yeah, I
children.
haven't read the whole thing. They were part of a series that I grew up with. I'm not Childhood of Famous Americans, I think maybe was the series. Anyway, but yeah, I haven't read it, so I don't know that I would recommend it at this point, but it might be something to find. Have any, Frances, about clubs? Oh, Frances Willard in her time as an educator was very much about small women's clubs and organizations. There's a really good biography of Willard actually by a woman named Ruth Borden. It's several years old, and there's going to be a new biography coming out in the next couple of years of her. But the Ruth Borden biography talks a lot about this early time period in her life, and might be a good place to start.
In terms of like actual book clubs at the House Museum, that actually is something we've considered for a long time, and we've had staff members who have been interested in undertaking that. So if that is a program suggestion, we will take note.
Yes, exactly. Yes, we're always interested in that. Okay, let me see if there's any other. I'm not sure, Anita. That's a really good question. She was Willard. I mean, part of her ideas about incremental change was to bring everyone with her, including the men who may have been who were obviously in power and may have been in opposition to her. So she was always thinking about, how do I get everyone to stay with me? I'm going to make this change, but I'm going to keep everyone. I'm not going to lose anyone in the process. So, so I think that would be her general reaction to men who may have been supporters, but maybe needed to be brought along. So let's talk a little, Fiona, about what's coming up this fall. Why don't you share a little about that, and then we'll
so our next event,
wrap everything up. Go ahead.
Yeah, our next event is Sunday, October 17th at 4 p.m. and it will be on Zoom. It is a handicraft hour. So during the pandemic last winter, we started this series of monthly participatory get-togethers where they're not recorded, they're really a place to chat, where everyone brings their own craft project to work on. And we, either the staff or invited guests, give brief presentations of often an article of handicraft from our collections or some aspect of women's handmade creations in history. And we work on our own projects while we listen, and then we open it up for conversation and discussion. So they were a big hit last winter and spring, and so we're bringing it back this fall. And so October 17th is our first day for that, and that is part of the sort of Arts at the Willard House initiative that we've launched this year. Lori, I don't know if you want to say something about views. I also can, but that's.
Yeah, and at the end of October, we're going to present a program in partnership with the Nashville Public Library, our truth-telling project, which is an online exhibit for us that you can find about a conflict between Frances Willard and Ida B. Wells in the 1890s. Very important, groundbreaking project for us. The Nashville Public Library has created a version of that exhibit for their new display on women's lives in Tennessee. And Ida B. Wells was from Tennessee before she moved north to Chicago. So this is an interesting way for us to connect our story to the wider story. We're going to be presenting a program where we're going to be in conversation with the curator of the exhibit in Nashville, and Michelle Duster, who is the great granddaughter of Ida B. Wells, and I will be talking about the overall work of truth telling. If you want to know more about that, just go to our website. And then in November, we're going to start our faith. Let's see if I've got it right. Fiona, do you have it in front of you? Faith, women,
Women,
activism, and faith.
Yeah, those three words, women.
And we're starting it with a presentation by Lucy Knight, who is a friend and former president of the board of our organization, but she is best known for her, or maybe well known for her work on Jane Addams biography, but she's working on a biography of Sarah and Angelina Grimke. And she's going to talk about their abolitionists, their early 19th century women activists. And she's going to talk about how their faith motivated their activism. And that's going to be a little bit of a theme we cover throughout this year in our Views series, where we discuss women's history. So we're really excited about that. And then we're going to have a bunch of things to do with Archives Month in October too. So be sure you're subscribed to our newsletter. We'll be sharing lots of materials from the archives, which really motivate our stories so much, the historical record that we have here that we can share. So with that, I want to thank all of you for coming. We're really excited you were here today. And if you want to see it again or connect with us in any way, find us on our website, send us an email. Fiona and I would be happy to connect, and Janet in our archives as well. So thanks so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Sundays.